More than 2,500 years ago, across the vast plains and rugged mountains of ancient Persia, a boy was born who would change the world. Not just through war and empire, but through wisdom, tolerance, and revolutionary governance. Dozens of tribes and small kingdoms dotted the landscape, each fighting for survival and dominance. Among these were the Medes in the north and west, and the Persians in the south, centered around a region known as Anshan. It was intelligent, disciplined, and most importantly, a natural leader. But unlike many conquerors of his era, he did not burn cities or massacre populations. He respected the Median people and retained much of their administrative system. Rather than destroy, he merged. The Persians and Medes became partners in a new empire united under a common crown. He understood that diversity was not something to suppress, was something to embrace. Each region he absorbed into his empire was allowed to keep its local customs. Traditions at that time, Babylon was one of the most advanced and prestigious cities in the world. It's a center of wealth, religion, and science. As he approached Babylon, he did not wage a brutal war. Instead, he spread messages promising freedom of religion, restoration of temples, and an end to the unpopular regime. He paid respect to the Babylonian gods, honored their temples, allowed previously oppressed peoples to return to their homelands. Among them were the Jews, who had been exiled to Babylon decades earlier. Cyrus issued a decree allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, an act that earned him enduring reverence in Jewish tradition. In fact, the Hebrew Bible refers to Cyrus as the Anointed One, a title rarely given to non-Israelite figures. These messages were not just political propaganda, they reflected his governing philosophy. And it was formally recorded on a small clay artifact that would survive for over 2 millennia, the Cyrus cylinder. Written in Akkadian cuneiform, the cylinder describes Cyrus's peaceful takeover of Babylon and his commitment to restoring the temples and returning exiled peoples. Today, it is often regarded as the world's first charter of human rights. He presented himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator. But internally, it was deeply divided. Its ruler, Nabonidus, had alienated the powerful priesthood and was seen by many Babylonians as a tyrant. The city fell without a major battle, according to ancient sources. Cyrus's forces diverted the Euphrates River and entered through the riverbed, taking the city with minimal resistance. The Babylonians welcomed him. There was no looting, no slaughter. In a time when conquest usually meant destruction, Cyrus's entry into Babylon stood out as a model of restraint and civility. Discontent was simmering beneath the surface, and even kings or governors, as long as they pledged loyalty to him and paid their dues. This approach created a level of stability and cooperation rarely seen in ancient empires. Where other empires relied on fear and oppression, he relied on respect and law. He saw his subjects not as conquered people, but as partners in a shared civilization. He allowed local customs to flourish, permitted religious freedom, and even adopted local titles when it suited the people he ruled. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus launched a revolt against the Median king, Astyages. Achaemenid, it would grow to become one of the largest and most sophisticated empires the world had ever seen. He campaigned through the regions of Parthia, Bactria, and beyond, incorporating territories that would form the eastern frontier of his empire. These were not easy lands to conquer, filled with fierce tribes and difficult terrain. But Cyrus was methodical and adaptable. He forged alliances when possible, fought only when necessary, and ruled with a surprisingly light hand. But Cyrus's ambitions did not stop with the unification of Persia and Media. He had a vision that extended far beyond the Iranian plateau. Though the Medes were powerful, their king had grown complacent, and many of his own nobles resented his rule. Some of them defected to Cyrus, including the Median general Harpagus, who played a key role in the swift and decisive victory. Though the Persians were proud and fiercely independent, they lived under the shadow of the powerful Median Empire. Their kings ruled in name, but their authority was limited by the political and military strength of the Medes. His name was Cyrus, and to this day, he is remembered not just as a conqueror, but as one of the most enlightened rulers in all of history. Some sources suggest that his mother may have been connected to the Median royal family, possibly even a daughter of the Median king, Astyages. According to legend, Astyages had terrifying dreams that a child born of his daughter would one day overthrow him. Acting out of fear, he ordered the infant Cyrus to be killed. But the order was not carried out. The baby was spared, raised in secret, and eventually returned to his parents. Whether this legend is true or a symbolic myth of destiny, one fact remains. Cyrus survived, and in time, the prophesied or imagined would come to pass. At the time of his birth, the land we now call Iran was a fractured region. Cyrus was born into this environment around the year 600 BCE, the son of Cambyses, the Persian king of Anshan. As Cyrus came of age, it became clear that he was no ordinary prince. When the dust settled, the Medes had been defeated, and Cyrus was in control, not just of Persia, but of Media as well. This was the birth of the Achaemenid Empire, named after Cyrus's ancestor. With a stable base of power behind him, Cyrus set his sights eastward, into Central Asia. It was during these eastern campaigns that Cyrus further refined his philosophy of empire. But Cyrus's most iconic conquest, the one that would define his legacy, lay to the west, Babylon. In 539 BCE, Cyrus turned his attention to Mesopotamia, specifically the great city of Babylon. Cyrus, always a master strategist, recognized this as an opportunity. The actual capture of Babylon is one of the most remarkable episodes in ancient history. After securing the city, Cyrus immediately set about restoring its religious institutions. This policy of tolerance was not a one-time gesture, it was the foundation of his empire. Cyrus's style of rule was revolutionary. Cyrus's vision for his empire was built on structure as much as it was on ideals. To maintain order across such a vast and diverse territory, he established a model of governance that would become the blueprint for future empires. The empire was divided into regions called satrapies, each governed by a satrap, a provincial governor chosen for his loyalty and competence. Unlike many ancient rulers, he did not claim to be divine. He did not erect statues demanding worship, nor did he attempt to erase the identities of the people he ruled. There, in a simple yet elegant stone tomb, he was laid to rest. Unlike the grand monuments of Egyptian pharaohs or Assyrian kings, his tomb was modest, reflecting the man's own character. In Jewish tradition, he was seen as a messianic figure chosen by God to free his people. In Greek literature, he was admired even by enemies of Persia as the ideal ruler. He reminds us that leadership is not only about force or victory, but about wisdom, fairness, and the courage to do what others have never imagined possible. Xenophon's Cyropaedia, written by a student of Socrates, portrayed him not just as a great king, but as a moral and philosophical role model, and for building not just a Persian empire, but a vision of civilization that would echo across history. In modern times, he has been reclaimed as a symbol of justice and pluralism, stone in scripture, in the memory of nations. Cyrus was not just a man of his time, he was a man far ahead of it. A ruler who forged the first empire, not only of land and people, but of justice and vision. When the Cyrus cylinder was discovered in the 19th century, it was hailed as a declaration of human rights, centuries ahead of its time. In 1971, the Shah of Iran celebrated 2,500 years of Persian monarchy by honoring Cyrus and displaying the cylinder as a cornerstone of Iranian national identity. It still stands today, remarkably well preserved despite the passage of centuries and the rise and fall of countless regimes. When Alexander the Great conquered Persia nearly 200 years later, he made a pilgrimage to Cyrus's tomb. Standing before it, Alexander wept. He ordered that the tomb be repaired and guarded, paying tribute to a man he deeply admired and even tried to emulate. Instead, he recognized that a great empire was only as strong as its people were free. Later, under Darius the Great, the Achaemenid Empire would reach its zenith, stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west, covering more territory than any empire in history up to that point. Yet the values and systems that allowed it to thrive, the tolerance, the administration, the philosophy of governance, all had their roots in Cyrus's rule. He understood that true power was not in fear, but in respect, not in conquest alone, but in governance, not in suppression, but in harmony. He proved that an empire could be vast and still just, diverse and still unified, powerful and still humane. Into Babylonia, in Judea, in Central Asia, his name was remembered not as a tyrant, but as a just king. These satraps were given considerable autonomy, but they were also held accountable. Around the year 530 BCE, while campaigning in the northeast against the nomadic Massagetæ tribes, Cyrus was killed in battle. The exact circumstances of his death remain uncertain, with various sources offering different accounts. One version, told by the Greek historian Herodotus, claims that Cyrus was slain in a fierce fight after underestimating a tribal queen named Tamiris, who sought revenge for her son's death. Whether myth or fact, this story highlights that even the greatest kings are not immune to fate. Inspectors known as the King's Eyes and Ears moved through the empire, ensuring that governors ruled fairly and that no rebellion could brew in secret. This administrative innovation allowed for a balance between central authority and local control. Taxation was standardized, justice systems were regulated, and the infrastructure needed to keep such a vast empire running was developed. Relay stations for communication and protected trade routes. The most famous of these was the Royal Road, a highway stretching over 2,000 kilometers from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east. It allowed messages to travel across the empire in a matter of days, an astonishing feat for its time. Though Cyrus had reshaped the political world, he remained a figure of humility. Yet even a man like Cyrus could not escape death. After his death, Cyrus's body was taken back to Pasargadae, the city he had built as his first capital. Cyrus was succeeded by his son Cambyses II, who continued the empire's expansion by conquering Egypt. For many centuries, Cyrus's legacy remained strong. Cyrus's vision was not just for an empire of land, but an empire of principle. Today, in a world often divided by conflict and mistrust, Cyrus's example shines like a beacon from the past. The world remembers many emperors, some through their brutality, others through their monuments. But Cyrus the Great is remembered for something far greater for his humanity. His name still endures. And that is why, even today, more than 2,500 years after his death, we still speak of Cyrus the Great.